I wanted to ask a question about legitimacy,
Mm-hmm.
um, because you mentioned that we've in modern society we've kind of the goal of the liberal state is to have the military competition no longer um, be you know be a concern, and so you can focus on economic
Yeah, within its
competition, right, within
territory.
its
Yeah,
term.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but I think that and then this idea I'm going to attribute to Foucault, though it probably predates him, but this idea that there's power um, in the system, but you don't know where it's coming from
Mm-hmm.
and how it's controlling you, and essentially how to break it in order to maintain that competitiveness. And I think that one of the main difficulties of liberal societies, a lot of people feel that way. Like
Mm-hmm.
there is this power over them.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, you mentioned the middle class stays
Mm-hmm.
stagnant,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not a lot of social mobility, even in welfare states like Scandinavian states. You can see that the social mobility is not that high.
Mm-hmm.
People who are born in lower class tend to stay lower class. People born in the middle class tend to stay there, and same for the
Mm-hmm.
upper class. Um, and so when you have people's perceptions that there's some kind of power over them that's preventing them from really competing,
Mm-hmm.
let's say,
Mm-hmm.
how do you, what's the solution to that? How do you solve that, legitimacy crisis in liberal democracy to say to people, look, no, there is real competition and you
Mm-hmm.
can move from lower to higher because there is anomaly cases where somebody through a Herculean effort goes from
Mm-hmm.
dirt poor to rich, and people point to that and say, "See, you can do that." But the response is always, "But
Mm-hmm.
you know, this is a singular,
Yeah.
or a unique case. The vast majority of people are stuck, and
Mm-hmm.
we're not playing the same game. So how do you and I think that question is more prevalent now
Mm-hmm.
than it was even 10 years ago, let's say.
Yeah.
So how do you stop, or how do you solve that crisis?
Uh, well, if I knew how to solve it, I would. But I mean, if I can just preface what I'm saying, that you started with Foucault, and you're right. He has this rather uh, amorphous concept of power, where it's kind of everywhere and nowhere at the same time, and um, it's precisely that kind of conception of power that I'm distancing myself from in that early chapter, where
Mhm.
I say to think about power, we have to attribute it to actors.
Mm,
Otherwise, it just turns into this kind of
right.
amorphous thing, right? Um, so the other thing I would say is that uh, my understanding, the way I think about the modern economy, modern capitalism, uh, is not that uh, we're stuck in this choice between let the market rule and have power, or let the state rule, which is for various reasons a lot of politics and party alignments. Major parties tend to divide along that
Mhm.
line. But the fact of the matter is, the modern capitalist economy and the modern state evolved together. They are symbiotic,
Mm,
and therefore, uh, kind of arguments to the effect of these things are in some sort of zero sum struggle, and we need some sort of radical choice, one direction or the other. I don't believe that,
mm,
and therefore I don't have any problem with the idea of saying, if the economy is becoming stagnant and kind of permanently stratified, which you know this has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with globalization. America had fairly high mobility at a certain point, uh, but we just won a big war and we were the dominant power, and the economy was changing very rapidly, and people were moving from industrial to white collar kind of work. But that sort of played itself out, and since then, in recent decades, it's kind of been much more stagnant, despite remarkable technological innovation and change. Um, so if we end up in this place where it's starting to stagnate and people are not uh, um, feeling that the system is fair, that's where I would say, well, we need to vote for political parties that will take a more interventionist relationship to this
Mm,
and think seriously about um, what the minimum standards should be and how to take areas that are extremely impoverished and invest in them. Uh, uh, and there can be lots of ways of doing that. It doesn't just have to be direct aid. It can be you know developing local business and all sorts of things through tax incentives. There's lots of things one can do, but it also raises the question of is there is not only do we need to level things up, as Boris Johnson likes to say, but do we need to level things down? Is there
mm,
a level of having too much wealth and too much power in
right.
society? Um, so that's a point where um, even though I'm happy to, I don't think we have any viable vision of something other than a kind of capitalist economy wedded to a modern welfare state. Uh, um, you know, Generally, I think the state could take a more active role in trying to flatten things out and
Mm.
make sure that the game is generally competitive.
And does that look like, you know, taxes that are more um, balanced or that tax the rich a higher percentage and
Yes, I mean, I don't want to, I'm not an economist,
all
and I'm
right.
happy to defer to, economists about many of the details of this kind of stuff. But yes, I don't have a problem with notions of progressive taxation and saying that the through taxation or however the state needs to find ways to guarantee investment in particularly depressed, impoverished areas, and investment that is not just keeping the wolf from the door, but is actually stimulating economic growth,
Mm.
at the ground level.
So ensuring this competition
Yeah,
is
uh, and it's that part part of the effect of an economy where there's a chronic tendency towards monopoly is that you get to points where it's just no longer profitable for the kind of private sector economic actors to put money into certain communities to pursue growth. And so you at some point you have to kind of start moving things around. I mean, there's a place in the end of the book where I kind of mention in passing the Crouch report by the MP Tracy Crouch, who did a study of football in the UK and was recommending that we need to do things so that small local football teams can get some of the money that's constantly being sucked into the big teams at the top, right? And that's because community football, its value is in terms of things it does for the community. Its value is not simply in creating football stars and huge gobs of money for a few teams. Um, and she's a conservative MP, right? Uh, uh, and my argument is that kind of by analogy, and I mean that's true for the system as a whole. That um, whatever economic argument you make, there are people who will say, you know, whoever succeeds most in the market economy, you have to let them accumulate the wealth because they're the ones who are best equipped to know what to do with it. You shouldn't interfere with that process, against what I'm saying. And that's an argument. But my argument back would be yes, but if that gets to the point where it starts to undermine regime legitimacy, you've got a bigger problem on your
mm,
hands.
because the economy is inherently tied to the state, right?
Yes,
That's why it would
yes,
undermine the state legitimacy.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't believe in this idea that it somehow naturally exists. It can't exist without currencies, contracts, uh, all sorts of things that the state provides.
Mm,
That and before the modern state arose, most limited international trade was just chains of rather tenuous contracts between people in different countries trading stuff along routes, but it wasn't nothing like the incredibly dynamic, perhaps too dynamic economy in terms of its kind of ecological impacts,
mm.
was possible.